Thank you guys for being here today. This presentation is obviously with Kyle Wright of now the Kansas City Royals. We'll jump into that, but it's called The Right Way. Unfortunately, Kyle's dad was supposed to join us, Roger. He's well known in the baseball community where Kyle's from in Alabama. But we're gonna dive in. Kyle, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
So my name's Dylan Staffel. I work with Rapsodo. Obviously, I'm in charge of all of our MLB business, but I've been there for almost 6 years. My associate Brian Page helps me on the MLB side. Also works with our key accounts. I'm sure we've talked with many of you before. What we're going to talk about today is a lot of different things with Kyle. More of a Q&A. If you guys have any questions, we're going to have a time to answer some questions at the end. But really want to talk about Kyle, his career, his development, his thoughts on technology, coaching, but overall, as he deals with an injury currently, although Kyle's path is a lot different than most players, being highly recruited, drafted very high, winning a World Series, I think there's a lot of things that are relatable to the players that you have, to you as coaches, and we'll get into that. So, Kyle, why don't you talk a little bit about your history to where you are now. Talk about your high school, obviously going to Vandy, your time with the Braves and the Royals. Just kind of walk us through a history of your path.
Yeah, so I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. Went to Buckhorn High School where I played for my dad. Decided to go to Vanderbilt. I grew up a big Alabama fan, still am, but Vanderbilt was the right school for me to play baseball. Really thankful for my time there. A lot of great coaches, and I owe a ton of my success to them. Got drafted by the Atlanta Braves, who was my childhood team. Grew up rooting for them, and was incredibly thankful for my time with them. Made a lot of good memories, and had a lot of success, a lot of failures, a lot of success. But now got traded to the Royals, so really excited for the future here. Really happy with the splashes we've made so far this offseason. So, unfortunately, I'll have to miss it out, but hoping for a big season for us in Kansas City.
Thank you for that. Kyle's been a pro staff member with Rapsodo for almost since 2019, maybe 2018. One of our OGs, if you want to call him that. He's spoke with us at many ABCAs. He does a lot for us. We've partnered with him with his charity. Do you want to talk about the summit really quick and what you do with that?
Yeah, recently we hosted a golf tournament in Nashville, and Rapsodo thankfully was a huge part of that. Was a big sponsor for us, and we partnered with the Summit Counseling Center, which is based out of Atlanta, and they work with a lot of local high schools, providing counselors and resources for students dealing with mental health and other issues as such. So Rapsodo played a big part in making this thing go, and we were able to raise over $100,000 for this. So mental health to me is a huge passion of mine. Had unfortunately quite a few instances in my life that have, brought this passion amongst me. But was really happy with how the tournament went, and again, Rapsodo played a big part of that, going so well. So thanks to you guys.
Yeah, no problem. We're happy to partner with you on that. I do want to point out that you did have some Braves teammates there. Matt Olson, Austin Riley were playing in a group, and the Rapsodo baseball team actually tied them for I think third. So. I do want to point out also for a lot of you baseball coaches, I got to give a quick plug to Rapsodo Golf. If you are interested in our golf products, feel free to come down to our booth and chat about those. Let's get into the technology and talk about how you've utilized Rapsodo throughout your career. What made you kind of come to us in the first place when not many coaches were, even back in like 2017, coming up through Vandy?
Yeah, I think once the Rapsodo I first ever used it was in probably 2017 at Vanderbilt, and this before data and analytics really had even started to take over the game like it has now. But I was fascinated with the technology and just how you can use it to benefit you. And early on, I had no clue what any of the numbers meant, what horizontal break was, what vertical break was. It was really an early adaptation you guys had where I just looked to see how far my stuff was moving from home plate, and that's all I used. And so it's just kind of funny for me to see how the technology's advanced, how I've progressed and learned to use technology that benefits me. So it's been a big part of my success and my growth as a pitcher since really 2017.
Yeah, it's awesome, Kyle. I know we got connected at the Vandy, a school known for having a lot of that tech. We worked with Coach Brown in the early days when Rapsodo came out. A lot of you, hopefully, that are utilizing the units. You kind of see from this video, it's the real old school Rapsodo video that we've had, other iterations since then. Kyle, you and I have had great conversations about the data, especially as you got introduced to it in the Vandy days. One that always sticks with me is when we talk about the spin direction. A lot of users, as you get started with Rapsodo, we show spin direction by the face of a clock. So understanding that, a true backspin fastball where you're maximizing vertical break is like at 12 o'clock. As you get closer, and we're talking right-handed pitching, like at Kyle here, as you get closer to 3 o'clock, you're maximizing arm side run, like true side spin. We had a really good conversation, Kyle, about four seam versus two seam, where you're naturally, you threw a lot of four seam growing up high school, maybe even into college. You got on Rapsodo, realized you're like in that 130. Would love for you to tell like the dead zone story, and then kind of went down towards 2 o'clock for some reasons with two seam. Would you want to touch on that? It's a really good pitch design example of like an already highest level athlete kind of making a change at a place like Vandy.
Yeah, I would say the pitch direction for me is probably one of the biggest pieces of information that I use, because whenever I'm off that way, my stuff is off. So my horizontal's off, my vertical's off. So one of the things I started to notice is my four seam was getting hit. Even well-executed pitches were getting fouled off or put in play. I wasn't getting that swing and miss up. Well, come to find out, I'm in that dead zone. 130 is considered the dead zone. So my ball, it's not really riding, it's not sinking, it's just kind of almost just fading right into barrels, really. So I learned that I'm really good at getting on the side of the ball. I don't do a great job at getting on top of the ball. I'll use an example. Spencer Strider, he is fantastic at getting on top of the ball. He backspins it, whereas I'm really on the side of the ball. So my strength is sink and run. His is vertical and ride. So for me, it doesn't make sense to try to get on top of the ball. I've tried everything possible, and I can't do it. So I learned, let's go to my strengths. My strength is getting on the side of the ball. So I learned that let's throw the sinker, and now let's get it into that 2 o'clock range. And now I'm starting to see, vertical close to zero, net below zero, which is, quite frankly, that's an elite sinker. And that's my strength. So that's something that I really use a lot. This doesn't mean I can't throw a four seam. I can still throw a four seam in that dead zone, but it's take your shots. It's pitch with your strengths first, and then adjust the hitter, adjust to, how the team's trying to attack you.
And like I love the dead zone, so that's why I go back to that. Kyle was, it kind of coined that term, and we utilize it a lot. When you are in that 130s, a right-handed pitcher, you're splitting the vertical and horizontal, so there is some arm side run to it. But something we've talked with a lot of coaches at the highest level of MLB, D1s, a lot of great developers out there, is the idea that that's what the hitter sees the most. A natural quarter arm slot, you do get 130 a lot, so yeah, it has some movement to it. But that's what the hitter is seeing a lot. So that's where you hear that, go towards, like Kyle found a great way of going towards 2 o'clock, getting a lot of depth to his two-seamer. We can also do the opposite, to 12 o'clock if it naturally makes sense with your arm slot to maximize vertical break. It's not that the 130 is like a bad pitch or anything, but it's what the hitter sees most often. So it's I think, a really powerful example.
As far as ABCA goes, right, we've got high school coaches here, academy coaches, college coaches, pro coaches. It's a great place to learn, and that's why obviously all you guys are here along with the trade show. Let's talk about, because obviously you've got experience at every single level, from the data perspective, because I think it'll help these coaches. Let's start at high school. From your experience, if you could go back, or even what you took from the high school, from your dad, whatever that may be, what are some metrics that you would, as a high schooler, focus on the most? And then we'll kind of go up from there.
I think it's important, one, to see what kind of pitcher you are. So it shouldn't be immediately the first time. If I'm a high school pitcher, the first time I'm throwing on a Rapsodo, I want to be Spencer Strider. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Throw a bullpen, see what you do well. If you're in that 130 dead zone, maybe you're a good sinker. If you're in that 12, maybe you can hop four seam. So I think, one, it's important to know what kind of pitcher you are and then adjust. It's not just chasing numbers for the sake of chasing numbers. You're not going to help develop. You're not going to grow. You're not going to get better as a pitcher, and you're not going to maximize your true potential. So I think it's really important to understand what your strengths are, and that's why a system like Rapsodo is so important. You can understand what your strengths are.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of what we talk about. You probably see it in our certification courses if you check those out, or our online content. It's like a baseline, right? At all levels. Kyle does it at the most elite level, but still getting on for the first time, with that have been more of the Vandy days, of like a baseline of understanding my spin rate throughout my arsenal. So when you're working with the players, you're understanding, is this player above average spin rate throughout the arsenal on the fastball, the curveball? Getting into the pitch design phase after you have that high intent baseline, does it make sense to pair a slider with this fastball? Does it make more sense like a 12-6 curveball because they throw more of a 12 o'clock? So a really good example there that that baseline can be powerful at all levels, and even the best pitchers in the world can make small tweaks to add an inch or two of glove side movement or arm side run or whatever you're looking for in that pitch design process.
Moving forward to Vandy, what were some of the major takeaways, getting there, right? And then as you progress to getting drafted, what were some of the major things from a metric standpoint that you picked up then, and then carried on to MLB, or you wish you would have picked up sooner?
I think even through college, freshman, sophomore year, again, we didn't really have this. So I think it's like this was almost 2 years earlier. Who knows what I could have found, but I think as my junior year, we kind of started to understand metrics and data a little bit better. Again, some of it was still just kind of the eye test of what goes well, but when you actually can see the eye test and pair that with metrics. So for me, I realized my curveball is really good because I got a lot of swings and misses. It doesn't take a genius to see that it's pretty good, but now what is my curveball doing? Metrically, what is it saying? Why is it so good? And the reason that's important is maybe my next outing, my curveball's bad. It's getting hit. It's not moving right. What did I do differently? What are my metrics this game? How can I compare to get back to my elite curveball as opposed to the one that's getting hit or not moving right? So I think that's just kind of what we started to learn is, what am I doing well and how are we going to reciprocate those movements to find more consistent success?
And then moving on to the MLB level, right? I think it's, a lot of people think that once you're at the MLB level, you've got your pitching coach, right? But it's not that way. You've got so many people wanting to, have influence on how you pitch throughout the minors and even at the big league level, with coaches moving all the time. How do you stay consistent? What are things that you focus on, to help you, get to 20-win seasons, whatever that may be?
I think, and this is something we probably all heard, but, you are your own best pitching coach because no one knows you like yourself. And I think coaches, we have to, you obviously do everything you can to help the player. But I think if the player internally doesn't know what kind of pitcher he is, it's very easy to get lost. And for me personally, I did. Early in my pro career, I was not very good because I wasn't pitching to the type of pitcher I was or what I was capable of. In 2021, I really started to grasp a hold of, what did I do well in college? And that's kind of what I started to do. I started to work back towards what I did in college. And that was, sinkers and curveballs, mixing the four seam, mixing the changeup, mixing a cutter. But I started getting back to my strengths and started to have a lot of success. So I think it's just really important to understand that you are your own best pitching coach and, no one knows you like yourself. And so I think, again, that's where I would recommend coaches. If you see a pitcher kind of struggling a little bit, really focus on what you've seen him do well and help him get back to that instead of just making drastic changes. Because again, that can lead you down a whole rabbit hole, which I personally have experienced.
Right. So Kyle, when you're making tweaks, you mentioned like the curveball may not be playing like, kind of getting back to when it was playing really electric. Like when you're utilizing things like the tech of Rapsodo, like what are some of the key tells that you're looking at when it's maybe looking to sharpen a pitch in the offseason? Maybe it's between starts, even if your curveball didn't play like you wanted it to in the last outing. I think it's really good to hear from you on like what are some of the things you're looking at, because there can be a lot of data. Every arm's different. There's things that you're looking at with each different athlete, but what are some for you that you're paying attention to of like spin direction, spin rate? What are the things for you that you're keeping an eye on in those bullpens?
I think for me, it's about horizontal and vertical movement, and then the spin direction, or usually spin direction first, and how is that correlated? But usually those always go hand in hand on how the ball's moving. I think spin rate, I don't really look at it as much anymore. I will on my curveball occasionally, just because sometimes whenever I get to yanking my curveball and instead of spinning it, that's kind of a good sign that, let's focus on spinning the curveball more. But yeah, I think, for my sinker, I want it to be in that 230 to anywhere from like 2 to 3 o'clock range. And again, usually if it's in that range, my horizontal and vertical is where I want it to be. Same thing, my changeup, I want that to be in the 3 o'clock range. Everything pairs up. And I think my curveball is the one that will fluctuate the most on me because it's a pitch that, sometimes I really like to fly open and I get 2 on top of it, or sometimes I just leave it out and it just kind of gets a little lazy sweep. So there's a lot of different numbers, but again, it's always going back to like my stock numbers and trying to get back to those.
It's obvious that data's king, right? Like that's the most important thing when it comes to this. But obviously, what we're showing on the screens here is the video. For those of you that have Rapsodo or don't, I think it's probably one of the most underutilized pieces of our equipment, right? Because when you're using Rapsodo, obviously all that data pops up on the screen. On the Diamond app currently, the video is always rolling, and a lot of the people that we work with, they use the Rapsodo and that video to develop pitches and make players better. How do you utilize video? How have you utilized it? And is it an important piece of your training?
Yeah, I think it's super important. Kind of what I just talked about. Maybe you're in a bullpen, you're working on something, and your pitches aren't, your data isn't where you want it to be. So now pitchers are starting to tinker with their hand. It's like, well, your stuff's not moving because your head is looking at first base. So that's where the video can come in, and it's just as simple as, hey man, just stay in a straight line a little bit longer. Quit flying open with your glove, or you've completely left your backside before you've made your move. So that's where the video can pair up just as much as the data, and understanding that, sometimes the reason your pitches aren't moving the way it is, it's not because your hand or your grip or where you're releasing the ball. It's just because you're losing a front side way too early, or you're over drifting towards the plate, not holding yourself back. So that's where video is always important.
Yeah, and just Dylan mentioned it, but like in the Diamond app, one thing I want to touch on is we see some really creative angles. So the way it does utilize, if you're not currently utilizing it or you're looking to on the video, is when you turn it on, it's just channeling the iPad's camera. So we always recommend, a tripod to keep the slow motion part stable. But, to Kyle's example, if that front side's flying open, you can get creative with that angle to where you don't have to be, in these examples we're showing, like the kind of the off to the side, you can get down in the front, back from the back so you can see it out of the hand. Maybe so you can show that athlete, this is where freezing it, this is where you're flying open. Because it is just the iPad's camera we're channeling. So we get when you have a lot of the metrics, it really ties in what's happening with the body, the mechanics, and a really good tool. So great example from Kyle on that. It could be as simple as flying open and showing the video example where the player may connect the dots quicker than you and the catcher or pitching coach is saying like, hey man, you're flying open, but there's evidence in the video with the data overlay.
Before we get into some coaching questions and your dad and just general coaching philosophies that you have, let's talk about your top 3 pitches and kind of dive into those. I think it'd be interesting for everybody here to see what data points you focus on when you're using Rapsodo. So let's get into the fastball first. I know in our podcast that you guys had a year or so ago, you talked about the change from a 4-seam to a 2-seam. But could you guys discuss, what you're looking for in a fastball, what you've seen in the past that could really help, players of these coaches develop into better pitchers?
Yeah, so I made the switch more from 4-seam to 2-seam again because I noticed my 4-seam was getting hit. Again, it's not that I don't throw it because I still throw it a pretty good bit. But I've learned that if I'm going to go down, I need to go down with my strengths, which is the sinker first. So I need to throw predominantly sinkers over 4-seams. And again, this is old video, old numbers, but where I'm at now, when my sinker's right, I'm anywhere from, 15 to 20 horizontal and anywhere from 6 all the way down to every now and then when it's really good, I can get in that negative range. So, and again, for me, that just means I'm getting really good run and really good sink, and which is good for me. I'm avoiding barrels, getting a lot of ground balls. So that's kind of like my ideal range for sinker. And again, my 4-seam, more so, I don't look so much as my horizontal and vertical. That's where I start to rely more on just my vertical approach, because my 4-seam numbers are never going to be very sexy. It's not a great 4-seam, but I can still throw the ball hard. I have a little bit of an uphill approach to the plate, so that's kind of where I rely on that.
And Kyle, can you talk a little bit to pairing the two seam to a certain type of curveball? Because now you're talking instead of more of like the vertical break. I know you mentioned you still can, throw the four seam where you got more of the vertical. Of course, when you're at 2 o'clock, you're maximizing more of the, this what you've talked about, the arm side run, the depth to it. So when you're pairing that curveball and you're looking at the data, is there a certain spin direction you're looking for where you're thinking, hey, a sweeper may pair better because it's going the opposite way versus a 12-6 curveball? Like, how are you pairing that curveball into the arsenal?
So for me, one of the things I learned with the curveball is the harder the better. This is the one pitch that I've learned that velo has really been massive for me. Ever since I started throwing the curveball harder, I started to notice a lot more success with it. So again, I would say this pitch can have a bigger range of what I'm looking for. I would say when it's best, it's anywhere 8 and 8, 9 and 9. Those horizontal, those vertical. At times, when I'm really trying to go for the kill shot, specifically against left-handed batters, I try to get on top a little bit more and get it to go straight down. And again, that's being able to understand how to do those. That's where an important thing like Rapsodo can come in. You can understand how to get that curveball to go straight down, closer to a 0 vertical, versus how to get a little bit more sweep. Looking for me like a 9-ish or so.
And that makes a ton of sense because, if that fastball, you are predominantly in that 2 o'clock range. When you mentioned splitting it like 8 and 8, you're splitting the vertical glove side, vertical depth, the glove side movement, where it's the exact opposite look as the 2 seam, where you're maximizing that movement chart. So it makes a ton of sense. And then, mixing in the 12-6. So kind of moving forward into that, like how do you pair the changeup in? What's the process there? What do you look for in the data? Kind of, you mentioned throwing the curveball hard is a good mindset. Like what's it look like for the changeup and really throwing it well?
So the changeup it was a pitch. It was my 4th, 5th pitch for honestly my entire career of baseball. And then really in 2021, towards the end of the year, I started to kind of find a feel for it. And now when it's right, it's arguably my best pitch, even better than my curveball when it's right. And it's been a really big pitch for me. It was a really big pitch for me in 2022 because it had elite movement to it. I was able to get to the 3 o'clock on the changeup, and I was getting anywhere from 20 horizontal to consistently below 0 on the changeup. It really wasn't a huge velocity difference. It was probably 5-6, which honestly, Steven Strasburg was a guy that I noticed he had a ton of success just throwing the changeup hard, but it had elite downward movement, and so that's something I really focus on and watch how he threw his. And not saying that's what mine is, but that's kind of what I tried to monitor, and it's kind of how it's played.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of really good success stories with that. I know when I really dove into the data, 2016, 2017, as Rapsodo is getting started in this type of thing on the baseball side, there's a lot of pronation, maybe a little more gyro on a slider, on a changeup. Like to your example, a lot of the righties, you see them going to that 3 o'clock now, maximize that horizontal movement. It seems like a lot of guys in the league, you as a great example, like it plays really well, a lot of ground balls, a lot more movement than maybe the older philosophies and the changeups. We kind of saw that change in the data over the years. And a perfect example of, tinkering, making changes on what's going to play in a game, taking it back to the pin and replicating. So love that example on 3 o'clock. As a lefty, could get all the way back to 9 o'clock, and they're maximizing that 20 plus inches of horizontal, like you mentioned, Kyle. In the arsenal, kind of thinking about it, any other pitches you'd want to talk about, or any other mindsets with kind of bringing them all together to really go after a hitter?
Yeah, I think so. Again, one thing I learned a lot is strengths always come first. And actually, I think it was I can't remember who. I was from Corbin Burns. One of the things he had a quote that really helped me simplify how to attack hitters. And it's very simple. He has how he's going to pitch righties, has how he's going to pitch lefties, and that's it. He said every now and then there's a guy in the lineup you're going to have to tinker from that. You're facing a guy like Juan Soto. He's probably going to get something different than your normal bucket of pitches. But for me, it really simplified what I want to do and how I use my strengths. And for me, it's to righties, it's going to be mostly sinkers and curveballs, and we're going to mix in changeups because there's always a good times for right on right changeups. And then lefties, it's typically going to be more 4 seams if it's right that day. Sometimes my 4 seam is just not it, and we have to go to 2 seams, and I'll struggle a little bit more with lefties. But then when in doubt, just throw more curveballs, and that seems to kind of work. And then mixing the changeup, and my cutter slider is kind of a where are we at that day kind of pitch. It's 2-0, let's try to steal a strike, or every now and then if guys are really kind of pulling off on a or really trying to get inside on a sinker, then I'll try to run run a cutter off the plate for a righty. But I have the way I pitch both hitters, and that's kind of how I go.
Let's get into coaching a little bit. Ask a couple questions about your dad. What's one thing, because everybody here is a coach, that you took from growing up prior to being, in high school or even in high school and prior to being in college and the bigs that you've continued to take what your dad's taught you?
Yeah, I think my dad, he knows me. He's watched me pitch my whole life. So he knows me just as well as almost I know myself. So he still always has like maybe little cues here and there. Nothing crazy, but just little cues that I can still use today that help me. I would consider my dad more of an old school approach first, but he's always adapted with the times, which I think that's what made him such a good coach. He's adapted and learned Rapsodo, which I think is important. Being well-rounded as a coach is probably the number one thing I can mention. There's absolutely still room in the game for old school coaches, and there's absolutely a room in the game for new school coaches. And I think the more you can marry those two, the more beneficial you can be to your players. Because I know as a player, that's probably my favorite thing that I can have in any coach is who's good at both. Who kind of has that old school grinded out. It's still a game. It's still about competing. It's not. Numbers are great, but you got to be able to marriage the two. And I think that's what's helped me get the most out of myself. And I've seen other players also benefit from coaches who have a good bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, a mindset we like to talk about is there's a lot of coaches that do have that old school mindset that have taught a curveball a certain way, a slider a certain way, a mindset a certain way, and see your Rapsodo, and it's another thing to pick up. There's a lot of data to learn. From our point of view, what we've seen really successful is it's another tool to really confirm those teachings. It's a tool for no matter what that mindset is. It's that same old curveball that you've had a lot of success with players, but now it's showing the athlete the video component of it, showing the break rather than the old days of the catcher like, hey man, that played well, let's replicate that. But then it's remembering that to the next session. As you do that, and like you with Roger, with your dad, that didn't have that for a long part of coaching, is it's just confirming those teachings and hopefully making more connections for the players, and then finding a thing to tweak here and there that you may find that you do a little bit better. Like the example of, hey, the two-seam plays, may not know that if you're not, tracking that data.
In your opinion, what's the correct amount of coaching to tech? How much do you as a player, obviously you use it a ton in the off season, but during the season, what's your opinion on how much these guys should be leaning on that, and also reaching out to Rapsodo to ask questions on how they can be better?
That's a tough one. I think it really depends on the players. I've played with guys who are so self-absorbed in the data that they forget you have to compete, and those guys you kind of got to kick them in the butt a little bit and say, hey, not today. And there's other guys who will consistently make the same mistakes over and over again when it's like, hey, we have a tool right here that can help us make those corrections like this. And I feel like I find myself somewhere in the middle. I think it's important. If you're rolling, let's just keep rolling. But if you're struggling, then it's like, why? Why am I struggling? And here we go. We have the data. We have the capabilities of making adjustments, from outing to outing, instead of just trying to continue to tinker and figure out, what the problem is, or why my pitches aren't moving the right way, or why balls that I was getting swing and misses on, now I'm not. And again, it could be because of data. It could be just as strictly as you're not sequencing well, or whatever it may be. So
I think an important tool too that we developed, that we released recently, is customizing the home screen. So when you are on the play screen, there's a lot of pitching data points to track. There's a lot to a pitch, more even than on the hitting side. But now you can customize that screen. So like Kyle mentioned, you may be in that pin, you might be rolling, you might have a guy that cutting his fastball. It's like we want to focus on that. I want to make everyone aware that's using Rapsodo that you can customize that screen where you see that spinning ball, so it gets bigger and you can see that, hey, there is cut to it. Maybe it's just the ball, spin efficiency, and velocity, right? Not to work. Every athlete's different. Maybe that would work better for them, but just want to bring that up as it's a powerful tool both on the pitching or hitting side to just customize whatever play screen you need for that athlete you're trying to, make better ultimately.
At Vandy, what was the biggest coaching advice that you got that still helps you to this day?
That's a tough one to pick. Coach Brown at Vandy, he's a pitching coach at Vandy. He's instrumental. I can't say enough good things about him, and I still talk to him throughout the season on, little checkpoints. Sometimes he'll kind of kick me in the butt and say, hey, throw your curveball. You're not throwing enough, or hey, attack with the fastball better. Just small things like that, just because he's seen me at my best, and He's seen when I've gotten myself into jams, and sometimes it's just, it can be just as simple as overthinking or not using your best stuff and, trying to get too cute with certain things. So, but I mean, me and Coach Brown, we worked on a lot of different things. So it's really difficult to pinpoint just one because he's so well-rounded and he's helped me with a lot. So I guess the answer is a little bit of everything.
In-game adjustments and coaching. How do you feel about that? Do you like to wait till after the game? Do you take in coaching adjustments throughout the game? What does that look like for you, and what would be your advice for coaches?
Yeah, I think so. And again, this is for coaches. It probably depends on the player, right? My pitching coach for the Atlanta Braves, Rick Kranitz, I thought he was really good with making coaching adjustments for me in game because it was always simple little cues. He never got too mechanical or didn't talk too. Just simple as, hey man, slow down, or just little cues like that can really make a difference. It sounds silly, but in the heat of a game, you're just moving so fast. Your heart's going fast, and you're just trying to compete and get guys out. Especially me, I get really bad issues of like drifting too far towards the plate. So for me, it's just as simple as slow down or just make sure you gather yourself. And again, I think it's dependent upon the player. I would say more times than not, it's you want to keep it more compete motivated than get too mechanical or analytical. Just because, like I said, it's really difficult to make those type of adjustments in game when you're going so fast. So that's I give Rick Krantz a lot of credit for that and just how he managed me and the other guys throughout the games.
When it comes to like between start to start, I think there's so many different things that people do. There's so many technologies that can be used, so many different, rehab treatments. Could you talk about your repertoire start to start? Because obviously it works for you, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can go into that, but I think it's just making sure. I guess again we're going back into that pitch in the buckets type thing. This is what I want to do for righties. This is what I want to do to lefties. And yeah, I guess I don't have a great answer for that one. Sorry.
What about arm care specifically? Like, what are you doing?
Arm care specifically, I'm pretty much the same routine. And again, this is this would be normal. This isn't when I'm grinding through a shoulder injury, but I for me it's an upper and a lower every week throughout my starts. Just making sure I'm getting that strength base. I think that's a really important component is maintaining strength throughout the season. It's not about, and again, this is not a 5-day rotation. It's not about putting up as much weight as you can, but I also think you don't want to ever avoid the strength aspect of it. That it can help you maintain that full season. So I think every week it's an upper and a lower. Usually my upper is the day of my bullpen, and usually the lower is the day after I start. And that's really pretty much my routine, and some minor arm care stuff throughout the week as well.
When we're talking about recruiting or getting drafted, what is some advice you could give to these coaches on what they should look for in a high school player? What would you look for if you were in their shoes in a player, whether that's mental capacity, whether that's spin rate, because there's so many different data points now. What would you be looking for in terms of advice for these coaches when recruiting a player?
I think one is probably athleticism. I think athletes usually always translate pretty well in whatever they do. So again, I guess for a kid, that's the importance of weight room and working out. When in doubt, I understand the importance of making pitches, but also when in doubt, velocity plays, even at the highest level. If there's guys with big arms, more times than not, they're going to have success. They're going to get opportunities. Now, with that being said, you still got to make pitches. You got to be able to be in the strike zone. Good secondary pitches are important too, but guys with big capabilities, big athletic bodies, strong. I think that's a really important thing that typically that I've seen translates pretty well as you continue to grow and go up the ladder.
Let's get into your injury. Obviously, you're rehabbing with your shoulder right now, and I think that's what's relatable to all these coaches, right? Like players get injured. What is your plan rehab-wise with Rapsodo? Obviously, the great thing is that you have all this data from your historical time at Vandy or even with the Braves. But as you rehab and start to use Rapsodo, what is your plan for getting back to where you were?
Yeah, I think I probably, if I wasn't so stubborn, a lot of baseball players are stubborn. I could have known that my shoulder injury was kind of coming because my numbers were not anywhere close to where they were.
Which one specifically? Because I think that's important, right? With Rapsodo, you can actually tell, right? Because you're seeing it on a day-to-day basis that there's some, regression here. So
Yeah.
what was it for you specifically?
I think probably the biggest one was the curveball. This is where I use spin. My spin was way lower. For the life of me, I could not get the ball to sweep at all. I could only get it to go top to bottom. So that was probably the number one. My velo was down a tick, but again, it was kind of command. Command started to get all over the place, which previously in 2022, I was probably the best command I'd had of my career. So I noticed my curveball was not anywhere close to the same. So now in this rehab process, when I get back on the mound, now have those data points of where's my curveball when it's at its best, where's my curveball when we're kind of looking more towards like I was when I was injured and pitching probably stupidly through that. But I think this is where data can be massive in a rehab, is understanding who was I when I was at my best and how do I get back to that.
And that's to the point where that historical data is so important. And we do have session types where there's high intent, low intent, flat ground, any session type you can think of. But rehab's a really important one because, we are in a game where there's a lot of shoulder, a lot of TJs that naturally happen. But knowing what those spin rates were, I love that you bring up spin rate because we've seen that with other athletes talking with clubs where the spin rate can go first. But if you know from those high intent sessions what the baseline, what the spin rate was, you can then utilize the rehab session to kind of know as you're in that progression back that, hey, I'm back to, what I was, and also paying attention to the release window, right? Like, hey, am I releasing from the same height off the ground, same distance from the rubber to get that tunneling back to with, through the rehab. So a great example there at the spin rate and kind of what you see throughout that process.
Obviously, you're big on mental health, right? You're injured for a long period of time. What is some advice you can give to coaches on staying positive through that? How to coach players that are injured, and there may not seem like there's an end in sight. What's your advice to coaches on that?
I think one is for the player is to really dig into your weaknesses. What do you want to get better at? For me, honestly, it's single leg stability. That's going to be a big one I'm going to dive into. That gives me more of a plan of what I want to do, obviously outside of rehabbing, getting healthy. But I think it's really important to dive into your team even more, be a better teammate, cheer for your guys, be there. And that just kind of gives you more of that bigger sense of purpose other than just standing off to the side. I'm hurt, I'm useless, I can't do anything, right? I think that's important to be a good teammate, dive into what are your teammates struggling with? Maybe you can see something in what they're doing that's that can help improve their game. Again, in game, try to find tips. I think that's a small one. Is there pitcher tipping something? Can you help your guys pick something up? So I think it's just there's numerous ways to still be a good teammate and be a productive member of the team even while you're hurt and you can't play.
Couple more questions for Kyle here. About the Braves specifically. Talk about your 20-win season. What you found success with that, and what sort of tips you could give to these guys on success in that way.
Number one is I pitched my strengths from the start of the season to the very end. I never really wavered. There was obviously games throughout the year where you kind of get hit around a little bit, but I don't think it was because I got too cute. It's just some days you're going to get beat. Those guys, the guys that are hitting get paid too, and I think that's something that it's part of the game. You're going to get hit around a little bit, but I stuck to my strengths from start to finish, which I think really showed that I am capable. I'm a good pitcher. I can pitch in this league. So that was probably number one. And number two, I think it was just, again, I was consistent and I knew my plan. And for me, that was get ground balls. And, we had a fantastic ground ball defense that year. So knowing what are my team good at? What am I good at? Ground balls. So attacking with the sinker, not be afraid to, go right at guys early in counts. I stayed ahead, pitched ahead, and it's a lot easier to have success that way.
You've won a World Series. Obviously, performance gets you that. But what about that team was so special? Are there any takeaways for the coaches here to build a team like that that's that successful, that works that hard for each other?
Yeah, I think the Braves were not the best team that year. I was in AAA the whole year, so I didn't get to see it on first-hand basis. But you just kind of saw when I was up, you saw how well the team meshed. I think it's important. Brian Snicker was the exact same every single day, which I think is important, especially when you're struggling. And there was never any panic, never any doubt. Next thing you know, you start playing good, and you get into the playoffs. At that point, truly anything can happen. And sure enough, it was a really incredible run to the World Series, and I got my opportunity in the World Series and was able to be a small part in winning that. But I think it's just the importance of team, the importance of staying in the middle at all times, never too high, never too low, and it's a lot easier to have more consistent success that way.
Last question. When you come back from your injury, what are your goals now moving forward?
One is just the first one is getting back, right? I think I just want to get back to who I was, and after that, ideally, it's about winning a World Series, right? For me, it's always going to be team goals first. That's a testament to my dad and Vanderbilt. It's all about the team first, and I'm always going to be that way, and I'm happy, I'm proud of it. So that's goal number one, and then for me, I guess personally, individually, is just be consistent every time I'm out there. Give the team a chance to win. That's at the end of the day, it's a starting pitcher's job. Pitch deep into a game, give your team a chance to win. So that's my goal every time out. I guess take the mound.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all for being here. If you have any questions about Rapsodo, please come down to our booth, 717. We do have a new product that we didn't talk about today, the Pro 2.0. It's very exciting for us. If you have any questions, please feel free to come down. Kyle, thank you for being here. And if we could give Kyle a round of applause. Thank you.